Convicted felons who are serving their sentences outside of prison are waiting to learn when or if they'll have to return behind bars. Many were released during the pandemic to mitigate exposure to COVID-19, but a new opinion piece from The Insider examines where the rules stand now, especially given the silence from the Biden administration. Anthony Fisher is the author behind that piece, an opinion columnist for The Insider, and joins us now. So Anthony, tell us about this home confinement rule. What did the Trump administration do before it left office, and where do you think stand now?
Thank you so much. So in late March 2020, just at the start of the pandemic, the CARES Act was passed, which was a sweeping bipartisan relief package at the onset of the pandemic. People needed help. And as part of that, there was authority was granted to the Attorney General that allowed then Attorney General Bill Barr to advise the Bureau of Prisons to lower the thresholds needed for people who were nonviolent offenders in the lowest security prisons possible to complete at least part of their sentences during the COVID emergency at home. So that meant that people who had spotless prison records, who again were nonviolent offenders, I think there was something about like 27,000 of them were sent home during the pandemic. At least 20,000 of them have actually finished their sentences at home. But 4,000 remain who have not met the thresholds to finish the entirety of their sentences at home. They are in a kind of weird limbo where they could be sent back. And the reason they could be sent back is because at the very, very end of the Trump administration, after Bill Barr left, the Department of Justice issued another memo to the Bureau of Prisons that basically reiterated saying that when the COVID emergency ends, when the Health and Human Services Department decides that the official federal government designation of an emergency ends, then that these people can and should be sent back to prison. They should be sent back to lockup. Since President Biden took office, he hasn't said a word about it. Attorney General Merrick Garland also hasn't weighed in on it. So these people, these 4,000 people, are in a complete state of limbo, as are their loved ones. Quite a few of them have, rebuilt relationships and rebuilt relationships and their lives. They've all stayed out of trouble because if they had gotten into any trouble, they'd already be back in prison. So that's the situation in a nutshell.
Yeah, and if you've ever spoken to people who kind of talk about how to ensure that prisoners don't go back to prison to keep the recidivism rates down, having those familial connections, those community connections, those community roots, that plays a huge role, which I imagine, a lot of these prisoners, that's what they're able to do now that they're kind of on home confinement. You've spoken to some of these prisoners at home. How have their lives changed over the past year?
Well, I mean, yeah, as you said, if we believe that prison is supposed to be restorative and recuperative and not just strictly punitive, then these are the people that have taken the second chance on life and run with it. A great many of them, have repaired their familial relationships with their children. Some of them are now actually the breadwinners of their households. They're wow. People with elderly parents or infirmed parents, children. They've gotten jobs because when you're on home confinement, you actually can go to work. You wear an ankle bracelet. You have to clear it with your minders as to where exactly you're working and for how long. And the government knows where you are at every minute of the day. So these are people that are working. They're volunteering. Some of them are mentoring at their church groups. These are the people that deserve the second chance, which is supposedly what the First Step Act, which was bipartisan legislation passed during the Trump administration and signed by President Trump, was supposed to be about. It was supposed to be saying, we have too many people in prison, and some of these people are older. They are not a risk to society anymore. They've had spotless prison records, and it's really time to give them another chance. So in this case where the COVID pandemic was a worldwide tragedy, a historic tragedy, this was a second lease on life for these people who made the best of that second lease. And right now, for no good reason, the Biden administration is kind of letting them twist in the wind. And it's particularly infuriating for people who follow criminal justice issues, because President Biden, as a senator, in his long, distinguished career in the Senate, had a long record of crafting laws that contributed to mass incarceration. And as a candidate on the campaign trail during the 2020 election, he claimed to really regret his role in that. He claimed to have seen the error of his ways. This would be a wonderful step to prove that he means what he says by directing Attorney General Merrick Garland to direct the Bureau of Prisons to not send these people back to prison if they maintain the terms of their release. They have that power. An act of Congress is not required. This would be the perfect opportunity for President Biden to make good on what he claims are his regrets for increasing mass incarceration.
So, there are people out there. So this is sort of the flip side of the story is, hey, you did the crime, you do the time. Yes, the pandemic was kind of out of the ordinary situation, but you still have to sort of pay back society for your behavior. What's kind of the response for advocacy groups who are saying, no, this will be a bad idea to send these people back behind bars? How do they respond to people who say, but they didn't really serve their sentence? Their sentence was not serve it at home around your loved one supporting you. It was behind bars. That's part of the punishment.
Well, I mean, there actually is nothing that says, home confinement isn't a new thing. Home confinement didn't begin with COVID. There are people for many different reasons who are allowed to serve part or all of their sentences on home confinement. It's all a matter of levels. Nobody is suggesting that people who've committed violent crimes or are recidivist offenders or were caught with contraband in prison, that these people should get cushy sentences where they have air conditioning and can hang out with their loved ones. This has always been a thing, and there is even bipartisan legislation in the Senate right now. Senators Dick Durbin and Chuck Grassley introduced legislation earlier this year that would expand the parameters that would allow people to serve more or all of their sentences on home confinement. And it's primarily directed at older inmates, people whose health is at risk and who are really no threat to society. But it's not a novel thing, and it's just a matter of kind of trying to push our country to have a society-wide adjustment about the way we look at punishment and the way we look at prosecution and sentences. That to do the crime and do the time doesn't necessarily mean you must be locked up in human cages. There's a lot of ways you can pay your debts to society, and I would argue that somebody on home confinement who's actually contributing to their household, to their family, and to their community is actually paying back their debt to society a lot more effectively than they could locked up.
Good point. Anthony Fisher, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.